I'm Sandy Pritz, and I've worked at the Ohio State Center on Education and Training for Employment for almost 30 years and am part of a national research center there. And I'm now a consultant with NOCTI, which was formerly called the longer handle of the National Occupational Competency Testing Institute. And now, since a lot of people know NOCTI, we go by NOCTI and people think it's a lot easier to say. And NOCTI is a partner in the National Research Center for Career Tech Education. So my career has gone full circle from National Research Center to National Research Center. And I feel really comfortable and happy to be working in that environment, which is really fascinating. And the work that we are doing involves exactly what the topic here, the title says. We are working in career technical education and trying to contribute to continuous improvement for the field, what we are all engaged in, but doing it through something that an assessment company cares about tremendously, which is to use the data from assessments, and in this case, particularly technical skills assessments, for the most important purpose that assessments can be used for, which is to improve instruction. There are many other uses for assessments, some of which you may not think of as positively as this particular function for assessments. And we want to really focus on continuous improvement for the field through this particular use as just one component of how school reform and all other types of improvement can take place. And you could make this list as easily as I. Why do we embark on this continuous improvement? Well, the economy, now everything is tied into what is happening in the economy. Well, at the heart of the economy is career technical education. That's the heart of where jobs are and how productive people can be in jobs. Actually, my academic training is in economics. I have 2 degrees in economics, and it's human economics that we're talking about when we talk about career technical education. So that is one of the most essential components of why we are striving so for continuous improvement. And clearly we're all in it for student learning and the motivation that it takes not only to learn, but then to apply that learning in productive ways. And achievement is the ways in which people apply their learning so as to be effective in performing tasks that are needed in the economy. Clearly, school reform, how many people have talked to you and talked to me about various ways in which we can reform education. Those of you who heard Sir Ken Robinson this morning know that he's feeling that one of the ways we need to reform is by really focusing more on students' problem solving, creativity, and finding what makes their passions really make them select a kind of career that they will feel exhilarated and excited about. And I certainly resonate to that. I bought 2 of his books and got him to sign them for my grandchildren. The public expectations have been loud and clear, and you probably are getting the emails every week or so, every day, from some of the organizations that are trying to help really give us information about what the political climate is like and how that affects us in career technical education. And so I put down here, in terms of public expectations, exactly what was said to the National Association of State Directors in April of this year by Secretary of Education Duncan about the fact that our program effectiveness from their viewpoint at the Office of Education, in our case probably OVAE, that the program effectiveness needs to be more uniform nationally. You know, there are spotlights put on very high performance kinds of programs, and the reckoning there is that those need to be more the norm. And that we have certain measures by which we are going to be assessed ourselves in career technical education, and one of those is high graduation rates and the degree to which we can transition students to some post-secondary education without remediation. And there are various types of post-secondary education, and further training qualifies in there. But if we have a lot of students trying to move on and needing a lot of remediation before they can move on, that says something about the skills with which they graduate. But the idea of leading to employment in the field they studied, you know, they might be employed in a field they didn't study in an emerging field. So I mean, I'm not saying I agree with all of this 100%, but I do know that that's where public expectations seem to be settled right now. So we need to pay attention to that along with all of these other elements. And you could add more. In fact, do you want to add some others? Feel free. These are pretty all-encompassing. I think it's interesting to see how all of these components can be put into a framework that we can think about as a way that we deliver instruction. And this is by Rajewski, and he gave this in 2009 in Kentucky at one of their conferences. And we picked up on it at the National Research Center as something that really coalesced some of the factors that we were really strongly considering and needing to put into, you know, one framework that would encompass a lot of what we needed to address, so that you can see the public expectations there that impinge, school reform that impinges on student populations and the way in which we assess students in the new economy, because the assessment needs to match what the economy is demanding from those students. The ways in which students learn, are motivated, and achieve. And all of that comes into how student populations are instructed through curriculum and different ways in which their programs are delivered, the ways their programs are evaluated, and the students themselves are assessed. So I think this is a helpful way in which to look at the big picture. So to mention the mission of the National Research Center, clearly the mission is highly aligned to that conceptual framework that we just talked about. And this is what the mission reads, that the center will improve the engagement of students. That has a lot to do with the motivation and the degree to which they will then achieve, and this idea of transition from secondary to post-secondary, and the ways in which we will help them do that. So the ways in which we are involved, especially from the viewpoint of our partnership, is through technical assistance to states, giving professional development to career technical education educators, disseminating the knowledge derived from scientifically based research. And we've been trying really hard to adhere to all the tenets of scientifically based research, because often we in the field are caught short on wanting to give anecdotal evidence, and the field is being judged on the basis of other criteria, scientifically based research. And so we've tried to adhere to that to try to meet those public expectations. So in case you'd like to know more about the partnership, these are the organizations that are partners. NOCTI is headquartered in Michigan. University of Minnesota is involved, Cornell, and it's headquartered at the University of Louisville. And SREB is a partner through High Schools That Work, and they are heavily involved in another professional development project. So our project and theirs are very much in sync with each other, and theirs has to do with alternative certification of teachers and how teachers can learn what they need to do well in the field through alternative certification. Clemson University is working hard in South Carolina on a project that involves the state mandate there in South Carolina and how they can engage students in taking a very broad-based look with a lot of different guidance components. The National Association of State Directors, ACTE is a partner, and AED. So I think you probably recognize most of those. Each of those partners has been very active and contributory, and it's been very exciting to work with all of them. And there's really a good synergy being able to not only work with the people from these organizations, but also to really seek input for our project from them and to give input to them as well. So I wanted to give you sort of the context of this National Research Center. And the NOCTI project that we have worked on for 5 years in that National Research Center is what we now call CTEDDI. And you can see our mascot. Somebody said to us, now wait a minute, is that childish? And we said, who is it that doesn't ever think a teddy bear is really pretty cute? And you know, there we were with the acronym. What are you going to do except have a teddy? And there's a CTEDDI in the room right now. You need to be able to produce it and show them. The people who come to our program, our Jump Starts, end up with a little graduation present. So it's fun to keep it lighthearted. So you see CTEDDI going along, but it helps you remember that it's career technical educators using a data-driven improvement model. And this is sort of a capsule of what CTEDDI is. It's training that is highly interactive. We know that without a lot of interaction, we are not going to have the kind of sustained professional development that people can feel invested in. That it is a process. It is not a one-time event. It's not a drive-through kind of workshop. And we learned a lot about that from math and CTE, which I'm sure you've all heard about as one of the highly successful projects from the previous National Research Center, and a very good professional development project for integration of mathematics in career tech ed. And they have now been involved with 30 states and continuing to expand. We also now have authentic literacy in CTE, and that is in technical assistance mode now. And science in CTE is progressing toward that. And CTEDDI uses data that teachers and schools own. This is important because we talked a little earlier about motivation. Well, the students need to be motivated, but so do those who are using professional development models to improve what they do in the classroom. And there's nothing more motivational than using the data from their own students. And so instead of having some sort of classroom exercise with data that's trumped up, we ask them to bring technical skills assessment data from their own students. That does not need to be NOCTI data. It can be. It only needs to be technical skills assessment data that has gradient score reports. So rather than pass-fail, which doesn't leave much room for analysis. All you know is one word or another. So it can be any technical skills assessment, but the fact that it's their own students achievement and perhaps lack of same that is going to tell them information that's important for them as an educator. And it builds on the fact that we know now so much more about professional development. The research in professional development has moved forward significantly. And the idea of having a community of practice is tremendously important, that you're not in it alone in some isolated, have to go by the book kind of way. And it involves an ongoing and hopefully state-supported, although there are alternatives to that, but an ongoing mentorship and a coaching aspect so that it's not something that, okay, I know this, now I'm supposed to go and do it, without anybody to turn to, perhaps just the people in my building, but no, you have others beyond the building, you have others that have gone through this that are going to be coaching and giving assistance. So that's a summary of what CTEDDI is. And one of the important reasons to care about that and to have some feel that it has credibility is that we spent 3 years in researching and developing this program. And we did survey research. Of course, number one is always a needs assessment. Is there really a need for this? And how are you going to prove that rather than just have an inkling that, sure, there must be a need for this because we have heard about people needing it here, there, and everywhere. So we spent a whole year doing survey research in a sample of 5 states, and we surveyed both administrators in career technical programs in different delivery modes, types of schools, and teachers in 4 selected clusters of occupations. And we asked them a lot about that question. How do you in CTE use data to inform instruction? If you use data to inform instruction, how did you learn to do it? Did you learn in some pre-service program? Did you learn with others? Did an administrator in your school help you learn? How did it happen? And what kind of professional development, aside from using data for instruction, but for any professional development, how does it work best for you? What makes you resonate to the idea of professional development and moving forward rather than just having to do it and knowing you have to do it? There are various ways in which it can happen, and we wanted to know, how do the career technical educators feel about it? Then, once we got that information, we spent a long time developing the intervention, as it is said in research language, that would really address the need. Because indeed, we found there was a tremendous need, that most educators really didn't feel comfortable or confident about taking the score report data from technical skills assessment and figuring out what to do on the basis of that data. Even if they had learned about, some of the statistical terminology at some point, of means and medians and confidence intervals and et cetera, they might not be able to take that and look at a score report and say, okay, so this is what it's telling me. And so we designed the intervention by using what they told us from the survey, by using everything we could find in the literature, by using a lot of information from our partners at the National Research Center. And then we piloted this intervention in 5 states, 9 different sites. They varied from rural schools to city of Chicago. So we're talking about a wide range of different settings in which we pilot tested it. And the word iterative, now we've got to say iterative improvement because we learned to make that roll off our tongue. Finally, iterative improvement is what it was all about. So we have never rested with this program. It is a case of keep taking in information, keep trying to improve it so that the next people will be able to use it more effectively. So yeah, it's iterative refinement there. That's easier to say than iterative improvement. But that's what it's been all about. And we have taken it to many other schools to try to broaden the applicability, to get reviews. Every time we change something, we want to know, well, did we address the need that was expressed so that we're actually moving in the right direction with it? So we have gone to various schools to get it reviewed and get help with that, and to verify that the model is feasible for those in various career technical situations. And then we have been involved now in technical assistance and trying to put the word out there of what's available and in what way we can help to provide the technical assistance. So far, questions? Okay. I did want to mention some of the specific ways in which the pilot site educators felt that they could make positive improvements. Clearly, the data can show areas of general weakness in the achievement of their students in their program. There are some individual student weaknesses, but also some programmatic weaknesses. So it can be looked at programmatically, but also for each individual student, how can instruction be improved? And once you know why there's a weakness, then we'll go into the various steps to figure out now what do you do about that. Also, certainly finding the areas of strength that's equally important, because you want to be able to build on those strengths in order to address the weaknesses. They felt it was important that they look for materials in areas that they knew they needed to shore up in some way, to find different resources they could use. And these might not all be curriculum material types of resources. Sometimes they're human resources, sometimes online resources, just a variety of modes. Changing the curriculum in some way, either expanding it or trying to address the timing of when something happens. One of the examples that we use is the fact that in many programs, and in some in particular which we've been involved, safety lessons, which are part of all career technical programs, are easily made an on-the-shelf kind of item that you can pull out at any point. And instead of necessarily involving them at every step of the way, as most of you would feel would be most effective, there are teachers that say, okay, if I end up with a sub and I need something that sub can really grab hold of and use, it's most likely to be in safety. And so sometimes we have found that safety is a weakness in the assessment because they're getting it from a sub. Sometimes it's not as woven in because it's a sub. Sometimes it's the day before Thanksgiving break. I mean, talk about timing. So there are lots of clues that can be picked up from the scores. So changing timing is one of the things they thought, they got a lot of clues about. And as I mentioned, getting ways to address the weaknesses for individual students as well as for classes as a whole. The CTEDDI cycle involves something that is clearly not entirely unique. You're going to look at that and say, well, yeah, that's logical, because that is what the process really should be, and it's not as though we've invented something that is really stellarly from Mars or anything, but you're going to need to collect data, okay? So that means administer assessments, and in this case, we were using secondary level technical skills assessments, and our pilot tests were all at the secondary level. Once you collect the data, getting score reports, needing to analyze that data to interpret what does it mean, what is it saying to me, and that's an area that a lot of people struggle with, and they haven't been trained in that, and so they need some assistance in that. Question?
Are the assessments you're using all third-party assessments?
Yes, these are all end-of-program third-party assessments. Good question. Yeah. And then the idea, now we're not saying that formative assessments are not also important, but these are summative assessments that are third-party. Then you've got to make sure that you're not just using one type of data. It's important to verify that data and triangulate it with other data to see how the combinations of different types of data shed light for a particular student or groups of students. So that's step 3, designing an action plan. So once you know what the data is telling you and you feel comfortable that you have the picture from triangulating it with other data, you want to design an action plan that will improve your instruction and then hopefully improve the student learning. So designing the action plan that's based on what you know about the data is the way in which you strategize to improve instruction. And then, of course, you've got to get down to the nitty-gritty and implement the plan and observe carefully and review the outcomes, because you may need to keep iteratively improving that plan and its implementation, which is why it takes a lot of coaching and mentoring along the way. It's why it's not just a done deal. You have to keep working at it, and it becomes a process. And you know that once you learn a process and you have it going, it can pick up momentum and become easier and easier. So what's involved in the process is an initial workshop, which is facilitated by someone in the state that the state CTE community is already familiar with, someone that is respected and that is in a situation where they have the time to go to the various sites in the state and really provide the coaching and mentoring. So that facilitator holds the initial face-to-face workshops so that everybody gets acquainted, develops a rapport, and they go through a one-day workshop. But the fact that it doesn't end with that is what's really important. You are building an internal to the career technical site, community of learners. So they're a team of learners that are all embarked from different program areas in doing this kind of work together so that they can learn from each other and share some of their successes and some of the bumps they're experiencing and get help. But then also an external community of learners, and I'll share how we go about that. But clearly, if you have more than one site in a state, you're going to be able to communicate with them, and then beyond state lines as well. And so I've mentioned the fact that this mentoring goes on through the school year, so that you get through the school year constantly making improvements and making those adjustments. And the sharing center is one of the ways in which we can build that external community. We started out with the knowledge that a lot of people are on Facebook, including me. Okay, but Facebook has its educational disadvantages, one of them being that you cannot upload documents to Facebook. And so we set out, and we have some wonderful IT people at NOCTI who are willing to accept a challenge. So they built our own sharing center, which is a Facebook that we can use people's profiles. They can put comments on and respond to each other, but we can also upload their action plans. They can ask people to look at the action plan and to give suggestions for how to better implement it. We can share resources with them that we think would be helpful for them. So we just call that the sharing center, and that has been a really good way to develop that external community of learners. It is an approach that utilizes a local team, but it's a local team that's connected with a network. And that action plan, it's really the heart of this whole process. It's that action plan that's developed, implemented, redeveloped, and refined with additional data. I see that my teddy bear covered up some words there, but I think I said the words that you couldn't read. So we start out with the workshop, and the goals of the workshop are really to make sure everybody can speak some of the assessment language, some data and assessment terms and language that will help everybody to make sure that when they read something or talk about something that they all have the same idea of what we're talking about. And to help them really learn to use their data effectively for the purpose of improving instruction. I mean, that is the sole purpose that we're involved with. And of course, that means we're trying to help students learn more. Now, we can't, because of the scientifically based research, we cannot draw a straight line from this teacher is using this process and is improving instruction and sees that the students are learning more. We can't draw a straight line to say, okay, all of those students are going to achieve at higher levels, because there are too many other factors involved, as you well know, in student achievement and in what happens with students in schools. But I think we can all agree that if we can improve instruction and can see ways and measure ways in which the instruction is improving, that generally it will lead to better learning and higher motivation and achievement for students. So it's about learning to plan for that continuous improvement, and then sharing your ideas with collaborators who will work with you and who will be feeling a real strong part of this professional learning community and feeling that that is a new way of their life, and that it's not necessarily just some add-on that's taking their time. It's actually a way to save time, because if you can use your time more effectively to achieve the goals that you're about, you're really saving in the long run. And so, it's hard for people to sometimes say, yeah, but for now I've got to do this and this and this. You've got, for a longer term look at this, it's going to be more effective for you to become more effective. So that's important, and you need a lot of support for that, because there are times when it feels like, oh, but this is a lot of work. Maybe I, should drop it for this week. So you need support. We need to make sure that we're using data that comes from assessments that are valid assessments, because if we're using data that comes from very flawed assessments, then it might head us in the wrong direction. So we do in the workshop talk about how to make sure that you have a relevant test, one that's based on standards that are current. If we're using outmoded standards, that's not going to be really helpful in the long run for your students. And that the test items really measure what they're intended to measure, and that it aligns with the curriculum, that it's what the students really need to know to move forward in their field. And that there are people who are well qualified to develop those test items and to evaluate them. I've often said, as a former curriculum developer and really a test developer, people don't recognize that not everybody in education that's a really, really good teacher has necessarily had education and training in curriculum development and in test development and design. I mean, these are not simple skills that you take, one little course and, oh yeah, well, I'm an expert on that. So, it's a whole field that is complex and that needs to, be given the recognition that you have to have people doing it who are experts in the field and have expert guidance in how to develop tests and test items. And the fact that yes, question?
I'm sorry, in relationship to the tests for a lot of the programs in CTE. So what do you do in the case where there's not a test that aligns with the curriculum? It's about changing the curriculum to meet the satisfied tests.
Well, sometimes it is. Sometimes if the curriculum is really divergent from a test that is based on the national standards for an occupation, that is one clue that you might want to look at the curriculum. Okay, so you can look at it from that point. Now, there are a variety of ways and a variety of types of curriculum. And so it's not like everybody should be using this curriculum, you know. You need to look at the best alignment and make sure the assessment does align with the curriculum being used with those students. Very clearly, you're involved in an educational process that I use the analogy that means a lot to me of a bowling alley, that those students need to see the bowling pins at the end of the alley. And they need to be able to aim for them, and that's what your instruction aims for. And the measurement at the end has to correspond to those 10 pins. And if it doesn't, then that whole tight alignment is flawed. So there are various things to do. If the curriculum isn't going to be changed to match the assessment, then yes. Then one idea is to get one that's customized. And NOCTI customizes tests for particular states to match their approved curriculum, if they're asked to do that. So that's one answer, is to get an assessment that is customized to go with the curriculum that you've decided you're going to stay with. Now, one of the pitfalls in that is that you lose the comparability to the national statistics. So if you want to be able to compare, say, your state with the national data, then you're going to need to use the national standards in a test. But if you want to use your state standards and get a test customized to those because it goes with your curriculum, that's fine. The other thing is to take the assessment and look at where it doesn't match the curriculum, and don't pay as much attention to the scores in that duty area that you aren't covering in your curriculum. You know, just say, okay, we don't cover that, so we don't expect students to test well in that area. But that means you need to use an assessment that has very carefully set out duties and standards so that you know where the alignment is and where it isn't. You need a lot of points of observation and input in order to get a full picture. But this is our point of entry, I would say. And in that verify and triangulate is where you bring in lots of other data, the demographic data, the formative assessment data, anything. And we try to help people understand where they can go to get data that they may have felt they were shut away from. You know, sometimes the data exists, but they haven't been given it as a matter of course. It's a question of figuring out whether they can get the data and then, you know, using that with the other data that they've gathered. So yeah, thank you. That's absolutely right. I'm with you. Now we use pretests because we want to use the whole school year. So we're using pretests so that their teachers and administrators have the data to use starting in the fall of the school year. And they can, at the end of the school year, post-test if they want. We do not include post-testing as part of CTEDDI because our primary use for the data is for them to work with the data to learn how to use it. Teachers have wanted to post-test, and if they want to do that, that's great. We have generally seen gains when they have, but we don't want to have them focus on that as much as, throw the headlight on the use of their own data. They are using summative assessments. So often there's certification assessments that are being used. Those tend to be pass-fail. And so we are trying to help people understand that they may need to use other kinds of assessment as a preparation for a certification kind of assessment that is generally expensive, and it's a one-time pass-fail kind of option. You're not going to really test them until they've been in the program enough so that they've learned something. I mean, you don't want to say, okay, day one, we're going to see what you know about something that we've never covered in any way, shape, or form. So you're going to wait and test them when they've had some instruction in the program area. And then you want to know, okay, what of what we've covered have they learned, and can they apply? We're using online multiple choice tests for this data, but that is not to say that those are the only or necessarily the best assessments. It's to say that that is one tool that they can use to really learn how to use the data and the score reports effectively. I think that in the future it would be great to have an adjunct to this program that would deal with performance assessments. I don't know if you're aware, but NOCTI gives both the written or online multiple choice kinds of assessments and performance assessments. And of course, a lot of those kids are going to do a lot better on the performance assessments than they can produce in the written test. So it's not a case of these, we're only going to measure the student, as Bob says, by one type of assessment or one assessment. It's that we want to take that one assessment that we know is mandated by legislation and that everybody is having to use, and we want to make sure that they are using it for the benefit of students. So it's not the full picture, but it's an important part of the picture. You're using an assessment that could be used as a post-test, but you're using it earlier to find out what the students know and what they don't know, so that you can move toward a post-test at the end of the program where they will score well. So good question, because you're absolutely right. We're using it as a pre-test, as an interim kind of test to tell us if we're moving in the right direction toward getting 100 on the post-test, that kind of idea. Okay, we're only at step 2, but I think we've actually gone through a lot of steps before this. So drawing conclusions from the data is the second step, and really that's an important aspect of seeing how you can read the language in which a score report is written. So for example, here would be a test that an example would be in carpentry, and it has different duty areas in it, and you should know that the assessment is weighted in these different areas in specific ways, and that too is a clue to how the degree to which it aligns with your curriculum. If, for example, we have 10% of the test in tools and accessories, and 40% of the curriculum is in that area, clearly that's a misalignment. So, paying attention not only to what the duty areas are and the standards within it, but also the weightings. And this would be one kind of score report. So this is a pretest in all these different duty areas for the carpentry program, and we have 6 students here who have taken the test, and if presented with all these numbers, what information can we glean from them? Or does it look like Greek and something I want to fold up and send off elsewhere? So That's a typical kind of example. So after really learning to use those kinds of numbers, then we get into what we were talking about verifying and triangulating it with other kinds of data. And the demographic data, the types of data are numerous. And in the CTEDDI process, we go through various types of data that the educators might find helpful and try to think where they could get that data, find out what's available, and how they can really insert that data into their thinking, or as Bob put it, into their hypotheses about instructional improvement. And here's one idea, of course, is using data on academic achievement. And that data is going to be very available because there's a lot of emphasis on the academics testing. So that's one important aspect to be sure to fold in. And so we go through various examples of how to get that data and have it and look at it in light of the technical skills assessment data. And then to say, okay, it's now, we've learned a lot about this, and it's just the same as students. You say they've learned a lot, but can they apply it? Can they perform it? Well, for a teacher, we've learned a lot about the data, but now can we use it? Can we apply it in the way in which we want to move? And so they design an action plan. And I believe actually in Maine, where they're using the CTEDDI process, they want to sort of reformat this, and that's fine. People have to work with these ideas in a way that makes sense to them. But the essence of it, I think you can see here, has to do with looking at some long-term goals, looking at where the strengths are in the data in your program as revealed by the data, where some of the weaknesses are for the class or for individual students, and then what you're going to do about it. And putting a priority on that. What should I be doing first, and how am I going to do it? And what strategies should I be using to implement this action plan? That's where a lot of input is really helpful, because a lot of people say, okay, well, so this is weak there. How can I address that problem? And they can get a lot of help from others in their same program area, maybe not at their site or even in their state, but elsewhere. So the idea then is you're trying ideas and you're sharing ideas, and moving forward with those is the essence of the plan. After the workshop, the balance of the school year is really where the heaviest weight of the program is, and yet, you can say it in a few words, and yet those words are powerful. It has to do with the follow-up mentoring and coaching. We have post-workshop activities to help focus the attention, and that ongoing communication through the sharing center. I like this little CTEDDI holding his data bar. And there are various ways to do these follow-ups. They can be by person-to-person visit, by webinar, by phone, by email, any means of communication. And you can see there the purposes, identifying problems and trying to really smooth out the bumps, really to share what is working so that it's helpful to others, and to keep asking questions about what we're going to do, what is working, what's not, and then the next steps to really document what is happening so that you have a trail to know how you are moving forward in the intended direction. This is just a screenshot of the sharing center. We have a separate portion of the sharing center for the facilitators, and an additional portion for the educators participating. Some of the facilitators really want help on how they can help the educators in their states or clusters of schools. So people have their profile on, just like Facebook. They have a photo. They don't have to have their whole history on it, though. And you can see on the left-hand side is where we have documents that are uploaded to the site. So people can post a question or post something that they have found or they're interested in, and then they can have threaded conversations on this sharing center. And in terms of thinking through, well, why would I want to do this? These, I think, sort of summarize from different perspectives what the benefits are of working in this kind of program. Certainly, the benefits there that you see for educators are things we've talked about. The CTE community as a whole needs to really work toward tools that are logic-based that can help them prove that they're making strides in learners' achievement. And so this logic-based policy tool is one way to make sure that the CTE community sees this as important. It is a way to show return on investment. This is investment of time and energy as well as money, and the returns can be very, very significant, but they need to be documented for the CTE community as a whole. Obviously, everybody is interested in these last three items, increased student achievement, and as we keep hearing over and over and over, preparation for college and careers. And ultimately, it's going back to the economy, the gains in workforce competence and productivity, and individual careers that are successful, and hopefully in areas, as Ken Robinson would say, of passion and resonance. We work with state-supported teams. This year we're working in Minnesota and in Maine, and next year in California and Pennsylvania, and there are other states that are interested in participating. The more that we can get state-supported teams, the faster the momentum can grow. However, there are large city school systems that can undertake this, and for example, in Chicago, we're working hard, and Chicago can be like a state in some ways, and so, it's very flexible. It can be a situation that one site can undertake in a state, or a cluster of sites, as we're working in Texas with a cluster of sites, and in Texas, they're all big. And so even though it may not be statewide administration, and every state can start with just a few sites. It doesn't have to be, everybody has to do this all at once. Individual teachers can take part. John Foster, our CEO, puts it, this is for some people that just love data. And so we have the statewide implementation, we call that level 1. And you can see there the kinds of things that fit under that statewide participation. And that's the way the model is intended to be used in terms of technical assistance. But we are giving what are called jump starts. We gave one yesterday. And it's a way to really access the resources and get immersed in the program, see whether you wanted to go further with it with other sites, but also to learn a lot that you can take back and really implement at a school site. You don't get the use of the sharing center that way because you don't know if it's going to be ongoing. So you don't get all of the resources. So it's a hybrid in a sense, and yet it's an important way to get started with CTEDDI. We also have been asked to go and do just professional development, one-day kinds of introductions to the process. And so we use exercise data for that rather than teachers' own student data. So you can see that there are pros and cons here of the different levels. but we are trying to be very flexible. And in fact, each of the states so far that has expressed interest or is already involved has had some additional customizing wrinkles. So there's nothing like taking a model and implementing it exactly the way it was designed. You have to, work with what's already going on in the state and how it can fit into what the other professional development of the state entails, and just be cognizant of, the differences in what the state's needs are. And if people wish to apply, they can do it by just, actually one of the easy ways is to go to NOCTI through nocti@nocti.org, so easy to remember. If it's statewide, we need to have the State Director of Career Technical Education actually send a letter saying that, he or she wishes to do this with state support. And we don't want a facilitator being trained and not having the state director, really firmly on the page. And to know which sites are going to take part and to get contact information so that we can make sure that they are getting the tests they need, either that they can access them within their own state or have some other method of getting the tests they need, or that we provide them from NOCTI.